Satya is the science and art of self-realization. Supreme self-realization. And the reason for its importance is that it brings you out of suffering, out of illusion, out of ignorance, out of weakness, out of fear, out of the effects of trauma, and to recognize and to live in grace. As the cataclysmic events of the current world situation exponentially increase, the value of an approach like Sat-Yoga will become ever more evident. But the Sat-Yoga teachings are not simply about the way and the goal, but the understanding of the obstacles, of the nature of reality, of the blessings hidden within the catastrophes, and of the attitudes we need to adopt in order to grow, in order to release ourselves from the suffering of which we have been the authors, to take full responsibility for our lives, not to be victims, not to blame anyone, including oneself, but to rise out of the ignorance of our true power, claim it, and use it in the service of that supreme being, that supreme goodness, that supreme intelligence, that supreme love that is our true nature, that is our God nature, that is our Buddha nature, and that is meant to unfold now in this moment of great global urgency without delay. The teachings are useful because they come from that source that is at the top of the mountain of God that lies within every consciousness, that high end of the spectrum of the potential of intelligence and love and empowerment that is the source of the being of every one of us and of all that is. And because that guidance comes from the Supreme Source, it is accurate and can show you the way out of whatever traps you have fallen into, whatever dead ends, whatever illusory ideas about who you are that limit your creativity and your power to see truly the nature of the situation you are in, and to find your way into that nucleus of truth and love which underlies and pervades even the most adverse apparent circumstances in the phenomenal plane. But you must be willing to open your hearts and open your minds to truth that contains information that is unbearable to the ego, to the false self, which itself is the cause of the trap, and from which we must emerge as butterflies from a cocoon, as angels from human larval consciousness, and fly into the ether of God's presence, and live as instruments of that power and light and love. Any lower ambitions or intentions will not be able to escape the gravity of the ego's nature of entropy and can fall into that black hole, which is the death of love and consciousness and light that this world situation is now collapsing into, so that the ultimate truth may be known and every soul be given the opportunity to pass the test of its own discovery of who and what you really are, and to get that glory of gaining victory over ignorance, victory over illusion, and over apparent weakness, over self-deceit, over all of those demonic forces within us that would try to hold us down, bring us into despair, anxiety, terror, trauma, and to be victorious, to gain the victory over the apparent by surrendering to the real. It is that conquest of Maya, of illusion, that earns us the right to graduate, to become co-dreamers of the dream, and to turn this hell realm into a kingdom of heaven. But we must earn the right by having done that for ourselves in our own individual lives. And then the responsibilities for the cosmic balancing, restoration, rejuvenation, renewal of life will be put into our own consciousness, because we will have proven our capacity to regulate and to abide as true legislators of the world, true pillars of reality, because of our own willingness to abide in truth, in love, in fairness and justice, in egoless presence, in which all are recognized as one. And there is no longer any greed or attachment or favoritism or any kind of distorted perception or projection or introjection. No hatred of self or other. No impurity of any kind. If you can imagine such a self, such a world of selves who are benign, benevolent, empowered, beautiful, giving, generous, unified. And if you would like to live in such a world, you have but to create it, to dream it into being, and to live that dream in truth. And your will and the will of God united will make that dream into the real. This is the human potential. It is a divine potential. We are given that birthright of divinity. But we must claim it, activate it, awaken it, empower that, gain victory through the surrender of all that is false and weak and petty and narcissistic, and give our entire heart and mind and body and speech, every moment, every action, into the service of God, so that it is that consciousness, that supreme power, that supreme intelligence that moves our being, that fills us, that creates our destiny. And in that surrender, we gain all. And we gain a kind of freedom that can be shared and transmitted, that becomes the capacity to make this entire cosmos into the greatest and most beautiful work of art imaginable by any mind. And the same mind that created us and brought us here and created the imaginary veil of Maya that caused us to believe that we are separate beings, in the very dissolving of that veil, brings the realization of our unity as a single intelligence, a single superorganismic presence, bodiless, eternal, loving. And all of those powers that worked against love and unity will be transformed, remagnetized, brought together as a single whole, without crack, without fissure, without conflict, without separation. To accomplish that miracle, we must simply eliminate all of the cracks in our own consciousness, all of the inner conflicts at the microcosmic level, all of our own failure to live up to our potential greatness. And by letting go of all of those premises of limitation and weakness, dependency, fear, by eliminating all of those illusory, weak thoughts, negative, self-attacking thoughts, by making our consciousness and our heart into a garden rather than a battlefield or a cemetery, by flourishing as individual beings who are manifestations and avatars of that supreme, blissful self. We transmit that energy as a morphic field until all are enraptured by the bliss of that invincible, supernal, incomparably beautiful self, whose love is irresistible once we have been touched by that. Simply allow yourself to open your heart to be touched by God's presence that is your own very innermost self. And all will change forever at one stroke. And it can happen now. And only now. May you choose this most direct path to the Supreme Self, who is both within and without, in all that you are and all that you see and all that will ever be. And allow the emergence of that implicate reality, that implicate divine order, to become explicit, manifest, triumphant over all the delusions of darkness, and bring this world back to its true state as a manifestation of divine beauty. This is our destiny. But we must climb that inner mountain and not settle for any lower plateaus. We must not settle for any temporary pleasures that bring only pain and disappointment. We must claim the highest peak of presence, of inner silence, of stillness, of eternal love that sees all as a single whole and perceives without desire, without fear, without lack, and is that very inherent perfection that brings the power of God into this phenomenal world as the one factor that alone changes all, instantaneously and forever. Realize that you are that. There is no method to become that because you are that. There is only the choice to let go of the delusion that you are anything but the self that is God. And there is nothing that can stop you from that realization once you have made that choice. No other way of living can free you from suffering. No other understanding but that which comes through self-realization can bring liberation and peace. Choose to live in truth with an open heart and accept the emptiness of egolessness. The one obstacle to victory is the intolerance of emptiness. And it is the ego's misguided choice to fill its emptiness with sensory enjoyments, with food, with talk, with sex, with drugs, with alcohol, with music, with anything but the emptiness that is the portal to God. It would even rather fill its mind with self-attacks than to realize the emptiness, the absolute nothingness that must, through its acceptance of that true nature, realize the fullness, that the emptiness itself, as the supreme paradox, reveals itself to be. That is the final unfoldment of Sat Yoga. May you reach the summit of that consciousness that is your true self.